they're considered in a high-risk group because of their age, but both have been vaccinated. As if that's helpful, which it's not. And then 2 paragraphs up from there in this very short piece, Mrs. Biden, 72, last tested positive for the virus in August last year after Mr. Biden himself recovered from the same illness. Last tested positive. This is just what we do because we all understand that vaccines provide no protection at all against disease, but they just make you kind of roll with the punches. Right? So I mean, this is both old news and even the Telegraph, which is not a particularly left-leaning paper at all, is just it's just becoming background bullshit. At least they're vaccinated. Well, the last time she got COVID was just a little more than a year ago. What were all those shots about?
Well, I have to tell you, this is one of these stories that I, for reasons of keeping my analytical sanity, do not process because I'm not confident that it means that any of the things about the story are true. Mm-hmm. If they thought it was in their interest to portray Jill Biden as sick with COVID and recovering, I have no doubt they would do it.
Sure.
I do not trust that Jill Biden or Joe Biden got the same vaccinations as citizens.
Right. So you're keep going, but you are responding to a very different level of the story than I am. I'm responding to the media reporting on it and what it leads people to believe about the normalization of, well, of course she got COVID. Everyone gets COVID. Like, well, what were the shots for then? And, well, of course she's not going to get sick because, of course, she's vaccinated. So Both of those things exist within a couple lines of one another in this mainstream outlet.
Right. And I do process that part of the story, that the utility of the story is in reporting it just so, right? She got it. She's not very sick. Of course, she was vaccinated. And I can see why that narrative would be useful because, of course, we know lots of people who are getting sick with it, mostly vaccinated. And the obvious ghost in this machine is whatever Anthony Fauci was doing that created the problem in the first place, denied us remedies that worked, and then sold us a one-size-fits-all remedy that didn't work. And so what we should be doing is saying, okay, if this is the new normal and people are now just simply getting this disease on the regular, and whatever you think of it, you may think it's not a big deal. You and I think it's a bigger deal than people think it is because of some of the long-lasting effects of it, the broad range of tissues that it infects and things like that, that the costs of the errors that were set in motion by Fauci and his friends is gigantic.
Yep,
with no end in sight. This is something we are going to indefinitely pay costs over. And so we should be very focused on how this happened and what we can do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And we appear to be very lightly focused there, if at all.
Yes. Yes, we are. So COVID also seems to have hit the U.S. Open. One of the Grand Slam, one of the big four tournaments in tennis. And the New York Times asks, and you may show my screen, why are so many players getting sick at the U.S. Open? Just a few bits from this. So many people sick, but largely it's not being attributed to COVID. And the New York Times is kind of going like, oh, we don't know. Well, you're not required to get vaccinated anymore. So maybe, as if that would have prevented it from being there. But you're also not required to be tested. So how would we know? Well, not that the tests are any good anyway, but it seems odd that they are almost like pretending that you wouldn't be able to tell. When for so long, for a couple of years, it was all about, for sure, anytime anyone is sick, it's definitely COVID, even though, you kind of actually can't tell. So here we have, just a number of people sick. It's not just players. The ESPN commentator John McEnroe said on Tuesday that he is the one person in the story who actually tested positive for the coronavirus after feeling unwell. But again, The tests are unreliable in both directions. It is unclear whether all of the players have the same illness or whether their cases are connected, but something has been going around the U.S. Open. Well, that sentence alone is incoherent, because if something is going around the U.S. Open, it's connected. And if it's some things, it's also extraordinarily unlikely that, unlike any past year, a whole lot of players are getting very sick enough to have to stop matches, that it's completely unrelated. They're all independent cases. That doesn't seem likely.
Just seems like a contagious disease.
It seems like a contagious
behaving
disease.
like a contagious disease.
Exactly.
It is. I would point out, and I would love to have the retrospective data on this, the pre-COVID data.
Yeah.
But one of the things that seems to be true is that there's a lot of out-of-season illness. Now, of course, summer colds were always a thing.
Right. But this is worse than a cold here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so anyway, there is a question about, what was in Pandora's box that they released? What is the effect of this? And how much of it is them trying to spook us by, as they obviously did, utilizing lots of phenomena that weren't COVID and lumping them in with COVID deaths and all of this.
What game are they playing now? That's what I'm wondering. Okay, so the game has changed. What game is it now, guys? What are you up to? What's the point now? What is the job that you are trying to finish? New York Times. So here's just a couple more things from this article in the New York Times. Illnesses are possible at any tournament where players are often in close quarters and share facilities. But with players no longer required to test for COVID-19, it is difficult to determine the cause of the illnesses among them. Again, testing for COVID-19, if we actually had good tests, even if they did that, unless it was positive, you still wouldn't have any more information about what else they might have. But they're also not good tests. And by the way, why not? Why do we still not have good tests? That's a question. Health protocols at the U.S. Open have become less stringent since 2020, when spectators were not allowed to attend the tournament and when players took to the empty courts in face masks.Stringent is one word for it. Insane is another, right? You had elite athletes playing in face masks across a freaking tennis court from one another with no one in the stands.
Well, it did mean they could grumble at each other without violating any rules of etiquette.
Good Lord. When fans were allowed to return in 2021, they were required to show proof of vaccination against the coronavirus. Yes, they were. That requirement has since been dropped, and those attending the U.S. Open this year do not need to show proof of vaccination, provide a negative coronavirus test, or wear masks. And then this young woman, Jabor, I'm not totally sure, Ons Jabor, who was seeded 5 or something, got really, really sick. She says, I'm taking a lot of medicine, she said, adding that she basically took every medication the U.S. Open doctors have. Great. Good for her. Why isn't she getting well when she's taking all the medicine the doctors recommend?
Yeah, geez, I wonder what it is.
How does she get to be an elite athlete doing that? I'm a zombie because I have a flu, she said. So this whole thing just feels like yet another, psyop. Honestly, that sounds, we got one person, one of the most famous people at the tournament, who's now a commentator, John McEnroe, having actually tested positive and having all the symptoms that we are told are currently associated with the current brand of COVID that we have been sold. And yet these other people are assured that they have the flu or walking How is anyone continuing to believe any of the stories from these people?
Well, I want to go back to the conspicuous fact of us not having reliable tests.
Right.
The fact that the tests have not gotten substantially better over time is conspicuous.
Yeah.
And the degree to which the people playing this game have been interested in creating narratives that were not supported by evidence, but were very difficult to fight because it wasn't like you could say, here's the evidence, and it doesn't match your story because the evidence was confused by all this noise. So in other words, is it possible that really noisy COVID tests are a feature and not a bug because it allows you to claim anything at any moment? Mm-hmm. Right? And I do think I have a sense of foreboding around the upcoming 14 months that the U.S. presidential election is going to create a a fertile landscape for psychological operations of many kinds. We're going to have many claims of misdis and malinformation over presumably true things will be dismissed, false things will be portrayed, all of the usual stuff. And the ability to have a viral boogeyman that you can call forth at any moment by declaring that some set of illness is this thing may be the reason that the tests aren't any good. Because if if you could just simply go to CVS and buy a test that was reliable enough that, it really gave you a confidence that you either did or didn't have the thing, then we'd be in a very different place, because we would actually be able to generate information about what is or isn't circulating.
Yeah, that's right. So, in unrelated news, Novak Djokovic is playing. He's seeded 2, it's interestingly not 1. And he's wiping the floor with his opponents. There's lots of people who aren't sick at the U.S. Open. He's not the only one. But he, of course, is famously unvaccinated, was not allowed to play in earlier U.S. Open. And Australians, I think, captured him and had him in one of their little encampments. Yes.
Despite being well.
Despite being well. So well, in fact, that he refused to take a experimental treatment for a disease which, if he got, he would be very likely to fend off because of his youth and vigor.
Yes, and the treatment would be very likely, or too likely, to rob him of his elite athletic status by virtue of a mechanism that we will talk about a little later in the podcast.
Yeah. So, not surprising that he's continuing to wipe the floor with his opponents, but... Yes.
It is a little surprising to me, because we have known since early in the pandemic that wiping the floor doesn't help, since this is not transmitted by fomite.
Okay.
I thought that was a pretty good joke.
No, I don't think so.
Oh. All right. Well,
so an
attempt was made, as the kids say.
The World Socialist website has an opinion about what's happening at the U.S. Open as well. U.S. Open tennis players fall by the wayside as COVID surges. This is the first paragraph is amazing. And I'm just going to read the first paragraph and then the final paragraph of this piece from the World Socialist website. This year's U.S. Open tennis tournament in New York City has been plagued by what is being euphemistically referred to as a mysterious illness, and what, in fact, has all the hallmarks of a COVID-19 superspreader event. A number of top players have had to pull out of the tournament or have struggled to play due to COVID-like symptoms, including respiratory and gastrointestinal ailments. Actually, one more paragraph here. The spate of tennis players getting sick takes place under conditions where the United States Tennis Association and the U.S. Open organizers have dismantled all anti-COVID safety measures in the midst of a new global surge of the pandemic. This is the first hidden surge of the pandemic since the World Health Organization and the Biden administration ended their COVID-19 public health emergency declarations in early May, which cleared the path for the scrapping of all pandemic surveillance and public health measures globally. We just check out the language there, right?
Yeah.
The scrapping of all pandemic surveillance. The scrapping of surveillance.
Yes.
How dare they scrap the surveillance?
How dare they scrap the scrappy surveillance that didn't work worth a scrap in the first place?
Amazing, right? And so, this piece is long and remarkable, and I'll link to it in the show notes and all, but here is the final paragraph. More fundamentally, the criminal cover-up of the pandemic and the unchecked spread of COVID-19 must be opposed with a socialist public health program, in diametric opposition to the monstrosity unfolding at the U.S. Open. What is required is a powerful mass movement of the international working class in unity with public health workers and scientists to force the implementation of a global elimination strategy to stop all human-to-human transmission of COVID-19 throughout the world.
Oh, man.
This was written now.
Yeah.
This is this week. This is the U.S. Open happening right now. This is the World Socialist saying what is required is to force the implementation of a global elimination strategy.
It is almost a perfect description of how a Marxist would think about this. Like, independent of the biology, the implausibility of what it is they're proposing, force must be used to get us to unite around doing away with this virus that we're going to be stuck with for the rest of eternity, right? I mean, it is, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. And if we have to lock you in your houses and get your neighbors to rat on you in order to make it happen, then so be it. I mean, right?
Totally.
Communism in a nutshell. So
it's amazing.
Yeah.
They're not even communists. They're socialists. Like it's not even. I'm just shocked that anyone puts this in writing. I mean, like, okay, one more. Throughout the world, the vast majority of the population can no longer receive free or affordable COVID-19 testing. Treatments like Paxlovid and even vaccines will soon only be available at marked up prices. Who are these people?
Who are these people? They're like commies in bed with pharma. Like
pharma commies.
They're pharma commies. What the hell? It's nuts.
It's totally nuts. And I don't know. I guess just that. It's totally nuts that they would put that up and apparently have no sense of irony or embarrassment.
Yeah. How about workers of the world unite around not getting taken for a ride by this shit anymore? I mean, we wake
workers
up.
Of the world unite.
Yeah. This is just obvious, right? They're on the wrong side of history and they can't figure it out.